So let's talk about one of the most fascinating and frankly baffling spiritual figures in history, Ramakrishna Paramahansa. On the one hand, you have this revered saint, a guy who was practically worshipped by some of the greatest thinkers of his time. But on the other hand, his behavior was so wild, so out there, that a lot of people were absolutely convinced he was just plain mad. And that's the big question, right? How does a temple priest who can't even read or write, a man who acts in ways that most people would call crazy, how does he become the go-to spiritual guide for the sharpest, most educated minds in the country? It just doesn't seem to add up. So let's dig in. And here he is. This is the man himself. Born back in 19th century Bengal, Ramakrishna's life wasn't about theories you read in a book. It was this radical, full-on experiment. He didn't just believe in his faith, he lived it, in a way that just shattered what people thought was possible. And it challenged everything they thought they knew about God and religion. To really get who this man was, we have to go right back to the beginning. Because, even as a little kid, he was anything but ordinary. From a really young age, the boy, who was then known as Gadadhar, was just, he was different. While all the other kids were in school, he'd be out wandering in nature, completely lost in art or listening to stories about the saints. He looked at formal school and basically dismissed it as a bread-winning education, something that just fills your stomach but does absolutely nothing for your soul. And yeah, he wasn't shy about it. This quote just sums up his whole mindset perfectly, even as a kid. He had zero interest in the path that led to a good job and worldly success. He was already looking for a completely different kind of truth. So this search he had as a kid, it didn't just fade away. Nope. It exploded into this all-consuming fire, what the world would eventually call his madness for God. When he became a young priest at the Dakshineshwar temple, he focused all of that intensity on the Divine Mother, Kali. But look, for Ramakrishna, this wasn't just a 9-to-5 job. It was his entire universe. And his devotion wasn't some quiet, polite thing. It was a raging, uncontrollable inferno. And raging inferno might be an understatement. I mean, he would weep and scream for a vision of Mother Kali for hours on end, sometimes rubbing his face on the ground until it bled. He'd lose all track of the world around him, talking to the stone statue like it was a living person right in front of him. For anyone watching, this did not look like devotion. It looked like he had completely lost his mind. But here's the thing. Where the general public saw madness, the spiritual experts saw something else. Something incredible, samadhi. You see, it's a state of such deep, profound concentration that the line between you and the thing you're meditating on just dissolves. He wasn't losing his mind. He was losing his ego. Now, this intense focus on the divine led him to pinpoint what he saw as the two biggest chains holding people down, what he called lust and gold. In his mind, desire for pleasure and greed for money were the main things keeping us from being truly free. And this chart just lays it out so clearly. It shows how his worldview was a complete 180 from the norm. Where society sees wealth and status, Ramakrishna saw mud, just dirt. And where society saw objects of desire, he literally trained his mind to see the Divine Mother in every single woman. It was a total, radical rewiring of his brain. And this wasn't just some nice idea he had, he physically practiced it. Imagine this. He goes to by the river, holding a coin in one hand and a clump of mud in the other, and he just chant over and over, "Rupee is mud is rupee," until his body and mind viscerally felt that they were the exact same thing. Then he'd toss them both into the river. And if you think that's extreme, this renunciation hit its absolute peak with his own marriage. He was married to Sarada Devi, as was the custom, but their relationship was unlike any other. When she came to live with him, he didn't see her as his wife. He literally worshipped her, saw her as the living, breathing Divine Mother. The marriage was never consummated. It was purely 100% spiritual. Okay, so at this point, he's basically reached the highest peak of his own tradition. So what's next? Well, he does something that is just mind-blowing. He decides to run a spiritual experiment to see if he could find that same ultimate truth at the heart of every religion. And listen, he didn't just read a few books, he lived each faith. He was initiated by a Sufi mystic and prayed 5 times a day as a devout Muslim. He dove deep into Christianity and had a powerful vision of Jesus Christ. And here's the incredible part. No matter which path he walked, he always ended up at the exact same destination, that incredible state of ecstatic union with God. And this, right here, is maybe his greatest gift to the world. His conclusion wasn't some theory. It was based on direct, personal, repeatable experience. He came out of it all and declared, Yato mat, tato path. As many faiths, so many paths. All religions, he said, are just different roads leading to the top of the very same mountain. Now, you'd think the educated, intellectual elite of the time would just dismiss this illiterate temple priest, but what happened next was the complete opposite. The so-called madman was about to become the guru for the wise. So one day, this highly respected, very austere monk named Totapuri shows up at the temple. And this isn't just any monk. This guy was a master of Advaita Vedanta, a very logical, philosophical path that's all about a formless, non-dual reality. He saw Ramakrishna and instantly knew he was looking at someone with immense spiritual power. Okay, to really get what happens next, you need to understand this. Tatapuri was an absolute master, a spiritual heavyweight. It had taken him 40 years of grueling, intense practice to achieve the highest state of consciousness known as Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Just let that sink in. A whole lifetime of work. So Totapuri gives Ramakrishna the instructions. He says, pull your mind away from all forms, merge into the absolute. Ramakrishna sits down to meditate. And on his very first try, he plunges straight into that ultimate state and stays there, completely motionless, for 3 solid days. Totapuri was stunned. He couldn't believe it. The student had done in a single afternoon what had taken the master 40 years to achieve. So what is this state? What is Nirvikalpa Samadhi? Well, it's considered the absolute pinnacle of spiritual experience. The best analogy is that the little drop of your individual ego completely dissolves back into the infinite ocean of consciousness. It's a state beyond thought, beyond form, even beyond time itself. As you can imagine, word of this incredible feat spread like wildfire. Soon, the greatest scholars, philosophers, and intellectuals of the day started showing up at the temple. They came armed with their books, their logic, their complex arguments, all ready to debate and debunk the mad priest. And one by one, they left in stunned silence, their years of book learning totally humbled by the raw power of his direct experience. Which brings us right back to where we started. Was Ramakrishna a madman, or was he so profoundly sane that our world, with all its fighting and greed, looked completely mad to him? In an age like ours, still so torn apart by religious conflict, maybe the most important question his life leaves us with is this. What can we learn from a man who didn't just preach tolerance, but actually went out and lived the unity of all faiths?